Good afternoon. Welcome to the November 17th meeting of the Cape Cod Regional Government Assembly of Delegates. A word before I open the meeting. I'm not going to accept extensive comment on the proposed ordinance 10-20. We've heard and all the delegates have heard from the various speakers in 4.5 hours of public hearings. We've all received and acknowledged communications by email and phone, so I may accept one or two people on either side of the issue, but I'm going to limit the discussion to no more than 15 minutes. And once the Assembly convenes, the rules are that unless the rules are suspended, there will be no comment from the public or anyone, just the discussion will be among us. So I don't want to get your hopes up that we're going to have another in-depth discussion, okay? So with that, I'll call the meeting to order, and we will begin with a moment of silence to honor our troops who have died in service to our country and all those serving our country in the armed forces. Thank you, and now we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will call the roll.
Richard Anderson?
Here.
Ron Bergstrom?
Yes.
George Bryant? Leo Kukunis?
Here.
Christopher Kanega? Thomas Keys?
Here.
Marcia King?
Here.
Thomas Lynch?
Here.
Teresa Martin?
Here.
John Oman? Paul Pilcher?
Here.
Anthony Scalise? Fred Schilp?
Here.
Charlotte Strebel?
Here.
And Julia Taylor.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, we have a quorum with 85.42% of the delegates present.
Thank you. I'll now need a motion to approve the calendar of business.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like
Yes.
to make a motion to revise the calendar of business to reflect numbers 12 and 13, and to move 13 to 12 and 12 to 13.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do we have any objection or further discussion on that? If not, all those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Okay, I now need a motion to approve the Journal of November 3rd, 2010.
Mr. Speaker, move to approve the Journal of November 3rd, 2010 as submitted.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Any additions or corrections to the Journal? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, and now we have communications from the Board of Regional Commissioners. I see we have Mr. Commissioner Doherty here today.
And a cheerful good afternoon to one and all. It's been a busy day in Commissionerville today. We were doing a lot of stuff, not the least of which is we've carried over a copy of the DCPC ordinance that was passed by the Cape Cod Commission on Craigville Beach, and that's in the hands of your clerk at this time. We had a progress report on the litigation committee, the litigation management committee, with regard to going forward. We've identified, and of course this is all in anticipation of something or not happening, but we've identified that the litigation management committee that's in place will be the oversight, that the day-to-day communications would be through to Paul Neswicki and to, in reverse order, and Andrew Gottlieb and Paul Neswicki, since both of them are part of this, and on the progress on the wastewater issue itself, we had a very useful meeting with the town council and selectmen on Friday, at which time I believe that we're seeing some support from the selectmen that were present of moving towards having the county reassume let's say, a leadership role with regard to this, but we'll know more after the boards of selectmen have had an opportunity to, to look this over. And we're looking forward to seeing some information on that after, within the next month or so. We also had a very extensive conversation about agenda and agenda content and how our meetings should be organized, and we've come out with some additions and amplification on our agendas, so that the agenda would not only reflect a topic, but also reflect both some content and some responsibility for the agency person or individual who would be responsible for leading that topic in conversation. And we have. Mark has given us a memorandum giving us the initial draft of the budget review schedule, and that's coming up, and starting on Wednesday, January 5th through January 26th, we have planned morning hearings in that period of time to hear all of the departments and what they're intending to do. So I would point that out to you, that these meetings are intended to start at 9:30 on every Wednesday between January 5th and January 26th. And as always, our open meetings welcome the presence of everyone from the public who wants to attend, and especially those in the assembly that wish to attend and both hear and would have some opportunity to be heard. So with that, I guess at that point I would, with trepidation, ask for questions.
Commissioner Darty, yes. Tom.
This Tom. Right first.
This Tom.
The litigation management team, you already have a litigation management team in place, and this one is specifically around the issue that may or may not arise. Is that correct? Or
yes, because the litigation management team would include, like the chair of the Cape Cod Commission. So this litigation, the committee would be made up of some of those members, but the most important issue is the overall supervision of the litigation part of it. We are going to rely upon Bob Troy to advise and keep us abreast of those kinds of issues. But Anderson Krieger, was appointed as a special counsel to address this issue, and their day-to-day and nuts and bolts stuff would go through Andrew Gottlieb and through Paul Neswicki, based upon which part of the matter comes up. But we think we've taken a proactive role in this. It's better to be prepared, and the steps that we've taken, I think, would match up to what would a reasonably prudent person do to prepare himself for an eventuality that that may occur.
Thank you.
Okay. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hi, Bill. The DCPC that you forwarded to us for the Craigville Beach area, I've heard that the Barnstable Town Council has voted it down by a narrow margin. Did that correspondence get to you, and is that being forwarded to us for consideration?
That part I'm not sure of, but what I am sure of is that this is a second let's say, a second visit to this particular issue. And as I said to Commissioner Lyons, both of us have now voted in support of it. So there's two commissioners that that basically have come forward. But this is something that was forwarded to us by the town council for action. I'm not aware of them voting it down. I do know that there might have been a single vote that would have had them move forward on their own, because I believe that there was some sentiment within the Barnstable Town Council, and Tom could verify this or not, that this was a matter that could be handled by local zoning, and I was frankly surprised that that it did come back, but indeed it has come back, and we have signed off on it and forwarded to you for evaluation and consideration.
I suspect that I will. We have Paul Niswicki, the director of the Cape Cod Commission, so he'll touch on on that briefly after we leave this commissioner section of our agenda. Bill, would it be in our interest to have parallel discussions with the various departments on the budget process? I mean, last year we ran sort of up against it and coming toward the end of the mandated time frame to pass a budget. So, I mean, we can schedule our hearings, but, I mean, if you're going to gather together people on a Wednesday to come in and give you a budget presentation, we might think about having a presentation before the Assembly. Is that...
I'm sure that, as the commissioners do, you guard your sovereignty, jealously. So remember that the budget process is one in which the department managers would come in and make a case for things that they think are important, and that's the first time that you hear that. The commissioner's piece comes after consideration of all of the things that have been heard, and we then put together let's say a document that reflects what we have identified as being priority areas. I would encourage you to hear what the department managers say, but we go through this every year as to how this works or not. But
well, I know that under normal circumstances, we would get the commissioner's budget and then we'd review it in the various committees of the Assembly.
Yeah.
Last year, I think there was a delay because of some uncertainty about some funding. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there's
always something.
Delay of 30 days, and so by the time we got it, we had to hustle to have the committee hearing. So I'm sure that between now and the time when the budget is due, that we'll make arrangements to have enough time so the subcommittees of the Assembly can get together and so it won't be a big surprise at the end. That's the other thing.
Well,
I don't anticipate problems. I'm just concerned about the time frame.
I think it's our role to try to anticipate problems, see if we can avoid them. And but the thing is that each one of us have, in my opinion, have our role in this. And when I was over there, I certainly wanted to have more of a say in things. However, it's just my opinion, you really are served better by looking at a complete document which has a sense of what what direction the commissioners are taking with regard to meeting their mission responsibility, which is to try to enhance the quality of life for every citizen here in Barnstable County, and taking into account that I would hope that you would want to have the judgment of the commissioners with regard to where priorities should be established based upon the revenue that we've identified that we would hopefully see. In all cases, there isn't anything that that any one of the departments would put forth that isn't worthwhile and useful. But we run into that continuing problem in the public sector of seeing infinite need and opportunity and finite resources to support it. So hopefully, after the commissioners have looked at all the pieces, we would put together something that would reflect what we think would be the best direction going forward based upon the identified resources that that we have.
Okay. Well.
But I would hesitate to suggest anything.
No, I'm just concerned that we don't come up with the bottleneck toward the end of the year, and I'm not anticipating that, but it has happened in the past. So that's it.
We will work with you every step of the way. Ron.
Okay. Is there anything else for Commissioner Doherty? Well, thank you very much. Now have communications from the Cape Cod Commission. Who's going to be the Cape Cod Commission guy? I see someone in the back advancing to the mic. He's in disguise, but he's here.
Paul Niswicki, Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission. I believe here today to talk primarily about the wind ordinance that's in front of you. I think there are a couple of questions that are still outstanding on the ordinance. I just want to touch on them briefly, and then I'm available for any questions that the Assembly might have. There's been some letters going back and forth relating to the DRI process and what we can and can't do with projects that have wind turbines associated with them. The DRI review process is a pretty standard process. First, we look at the minimum performance standards. We measure those against the project. Then at the end, we have somewhat of a catch-all review, which is known as sort of the benefits and detriments test, where we can look at things outside of the standards. And then we do sort of apply local bylaws and local zoning bylaws and ordinances that are there. So there's been a suggestion that the local bylaws we could enforce as part of our review. And that's true, and that's happening now. Many of the local bylaws, though, are inadequate. They're drafted and conceived when we were talking about much smaller scale projects than we're seeing right now. And we have a project that's in front of us right now, and we will be applying the local bylaw there, but in many respects, as it relates to some of the concerns that have been raised in the town of Falmouth and some of the town of Bourne, it's inadequate. So we can and will enforce local bylaws as part of a DRI review, but the local towns are going to be able to do that too. As a larger issue, it's been suggested that we have authority under the Act to I don't know, pull up these penumbras of environmental protection and start to review things like noise or amplitude modulation in general without any specific standards. The only place that could take place would be in the benefits detriments test. And I would caution, the significant caution with anyone who feels that evaluation and a denial of the project based on the benefits detriments test would survive appeal. It's been very rare that the Commission has regulated any project, found that it is consistent with all the standards, and then denied it because it failed the benefits detriments test. There are two cases primarily that jump up. One is the Costco case in Sandwich. That was appealed. I think if we looked at the likelihood of success on appeal, Commission's was not in a position to feel like they were going to be very successful there. The land was transferred before that was actually appealed. But the more pressing one is the Keyspan case lately, that dealt with the gas pipeline in Yarmouth. And that is a project that met all the minimum performance standards. The town did not like it. It had significant impacts, and we felt that Keyspan hadn't taken those into account. And we denied that project based on the benefits detriments test. That was appealed, and we lost. And in losing, set a really bad precedent that resulted, that's hampered us in the Cape Wind case, quite frankly, when we went up there. So this is not something that we take lightly, but the benefits detriments test should not be relied by anyone who's concerned about these structures going up. It's just not something that anyone should rely on as being an effective deterrent. More importantly, if you look beyond that as a matter of public policy, what we've been trying to do over the last 3 years at the Commission is to make development certain and predictable. And that's what judges like to see, standards that are certain and predictable when they review. And so that's what the standards are that are in front of you now. It's an effort to sort of get on the books with some authority to look at these specifics. In one of the letters that I read today, there was talk about that project that's being reviewed in Bourne right now, New Generation Project, and 15 hours of testimony. And there's been a lot of testimony, and that testimony has been on issues of noise and health-related issues. We can't review any of those issues. Now, has there been testimony on it? Sure. And they can get up and the proponent can offer testimony, and perhaps in some of these cases you would see applicants that would spend a lot of time trying to address that, trying to win the hearts and minds of people that don't want to see these structures go up. But that's not germane to what the subcommittee of the Cape Cod Commission is going to take into account out there. I mean, there are the standards. The reason that project trip review is because of the clearing involved, more than 2 acres of clearing. And that will be measured against minimum performance standards. And the local bylaws, and they will either meet or not meet those. And if it's denied because they don't meet those, I feel confident that will survive on appeal. What I think is unlikely to happen is that the Cape Cod Commission is not going to hear that testimony. That subcommittee staff report's not going to say that there are noise or health-related issues, and it's going to be denied because of that, because the detriments outweigh the benefits. I think that would not be successful on appeal. And so this is the Cape Cod Commission Act and a number of different attorneys that have weighed in on this, and it's 20 years of regulatory experience in case law that support that position. So I think you're being led down the wrong road to have someone read the Cape Cod Commission Act and say, well, you can do this. Yes, we can. Yes, we have. But it is ineffective. And I think if you're actually hearing some of the concern and the nature of the concern, holding out hope for these people who feel they're going to be impacted on that test, I think you're doing a huge disservice to those people moving forward. So on that review process that's out there, we're available to answer questions. And the other piece is the technical bulletin. I mean, a lot of people want to see the technical bulletin before the regs. The Assembly is the county's legislative body. If you look at legislative bodies, what they do is they authorize agencies quite often, and many times in the legislation they give the ability to promulgate regulations. You know, the Great and General Court will do this with the Department of Environmental Protection all the time. They rely on that expertise to draft regulations that then are incorporated in the CMR, the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, and they are more specific, they're easier to change, they're more nimble, it's easier to keep up with emerging technology that way. That's the way that we've always done it, where we seek the authorization first. Those technical bulletins it will require a lot of work to put those technical bulletins together. If we don't know that we're going to be given the authorization by ordinance to regulate, then why would we spend that much staff time and resources on technical bulletins, especially in such a highly polarized debate, where the likelihood of success seems marginal? And so that's a resource issue, it's an expense issue, and it's an issue that we've just never done it that way. I don't know that that's an appropriate way to do that. The technical bulletins generally don't come back except for informational purposes or advisory purposes to the Assembly of Delegates. If that was intended, I'm sure that's what the charter would say, but it doesn't. So what we're looking for is some general authorization because of the concerns that have been expressed here. And I've tried to enumerate some of that in a memo to you today, the kinds of questions that we could ask if these standards were on the books, and the kind of questions that we can't really ask directly and will fall into that category of benefits and detriments testing. So I think it's imperative, if we want to have something to say, if we want to give people a voice, if we want to provide an added level of review of these projects, that we get these standards on the board, and then we work through the technical bulletin in the review. If the ordinances are not adopted today, it's unlikely that we'll come back with more specific ordinances in a matter of months. I mean, I think it's a process, maybe a completely different, maybe a spatial planning process that would substitute the process up to date. But what I can tell you is you will have projects and there will be no say except in a general consideration under benefits and detriments as to whether those projects meet standards established by the county as ordinances. So that's what I have by way of explanation as it relates to the DRI process, what the Commission can and can't do, and the technical bulletin piece that's before you. Having said that, if the standards are returned, then we'll do the best that we can. But it's I guess I'm still having a hard time trying to figure through the logic, knowing that we have a real-time project that we're reviewing now, and knowing how limited we are in answering those questions and asking those questions that people want answered. It seems counterintuitive not to have standards on the books, so that as it proceeds through the process and ultimate appeal, that we're on firm ground when it comes to requiring independent noise studies, I guess I'm having a hard time figuring through the logic. I think the expectation is if they send them back, then next month we're going to come back with a one-size-fits-all approach that sets out for every wind turbine there's going to be a parameter that you can't have human habitation in, is extraordinarily unrealistic. All of these projects, especially when you get into issues of noise and public health issues, are really dependent on where that turbine is located. And to come up with one perimeter that we think would solve all problems would be impossible to do unless that perimeter were so large that it would basically not allow any wind turbine projects to go forward. And so that's what we're trying to strike the balance there. So with that, I'll close my comments and take any questions there might be.
Does anyone have any questions for the Director of the Cape Cod Commission on this? Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to voice my frustration in that I've been following this issue for a period of a few months now, as it's been ramping up in regards to land-based wind turbines and these projects that we're talking about now. And the reaction of individuals that have now been living with these projects in the vicinity that they feel has been intrusive into their lives. Been to many meetings over the last few months, and here we are tonight with the ordinance in front of us. And the argument that you just gave, Paul, is I'm not saying it doesn't have merit, but I wish I heard this argument a couple of months ago. So now we're here having to make a decision that if we don't, we're going to do the public a disservice, yet we don't have all the information. It kind of puts us in a very awkward position to say, you vote for this and trust us, it's going to be what you want, but we have no technical bulletins or anything else to go with. It's a very uncomfortable position to be put in right now. I really wish this argument had come up earlier. We had more time to explore what you just enumerated. So I was coming here tonight to vote this down, saying that we do not have enough information to make a wise decision. But now here you are saying that if we don't make this decision, we're going to actually do the public a disservice. Now we have a real problem. Because there are projects coming on board that we need to have this, and we need to have something so that the Commission can act. It's very frustrating to be put into this position when tonight we have to vote. This is a problem, and I'll wait for more discussion from my colleagues, but this is a very, very difficult position to be put in right now.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Nowicki? Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll. Sorry. Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll have more discussion, but my question is, I'm trying to think of all of the times we voted on standards, and I can't think of when we've turned down a standard because it wasn't. I think we've always voted to turn back standards because we thought they were too restrictive. I'm trying to think, has the Assembly ever sent back any standards for a reason other than essentially thinking they were too restrictive? Not strict enough.
Not to my knowledge. There have been times when generally when ordinances have come back to the Commission, they've come back with specific recommendations. And lots of times the pieces that come back are sort of the regional policy plan. It's such a comprehensive document that there are a number of issues that might come up. But on specific ordinances, I can't recall one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Paul, I must confess I haven't read this whole proposal that you have before us today, but is there anything in there regarding the electrical force from the high lines that are going to be used to tie this into the grid? And if so, why not?
No. the EMF questions. What's before you tonight are basically three broad categories as they relate to wind turbines, and one is a standard for flicker, one is a standard for noise.
Right, yeah.
That potentially gets into some of the amplitude modulation, some of the health issues, and the other one is a setback. Yeah, the other one is a setback issue.
Yeah.
So that's where we started with, and there might be other issues that come up, but we know that these three issues and these three categories have consistently come up with every project that we've seen so far.
May I follow up? So it would seem to me that would come under the health and the health part of it, of what you're asking us to vote on tonight. And it seems like no one has ever mentioned it at any of the meetings that I've been to, or you didn't even think of it to put it into this ordinance, so I don't know how I can support it without that in there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to ask you, Paul, I always have a problem when the minimum standard, a minimum performance standard says 0 in it, like the minimum is 0. So the no adverse shadow flicker, I just wondered if you could just address that for a second, because to me it's sort of like there can be no traffic effects of a project or something. So maybe you can just tell me what that means. Maybe I'm not reading it correctly. No adverse shadow flicker, what that means.
Yeah, I'm going to let Ryan take a stab at that.
Thank you. Because the nature of wind...
Just identify yourself,
sure.
just for the...
Ryan Christenberry, I'm a planner with the Cape Cod Commission. Because the nature of wind has changed so much over the past decade, going from a distributed generation context to these more industrial land-based turbines that we're seeing, a lot of the best practices, industry standards, have been moving targets that have varied and changed with the scale of projects being proposed. Shadow flicker analysis is something that is fairly easy to model. It's like modeling the shadows associated with buildings. And there are varying degrees of the amount of flicker that a property would experience. What we're hoping to define through the technical bulletin is what is considered adverse based on the scale of the project that we're looking at and the situation involved, whether it be 0 to 10 hours per year, whether it be 10 to 30 hours per year, or 100 hours per year. So I think we can put some more qualifiers on what adverse and how adverse is defined within the technical bulletin.
That issue came up in front of the commission too, and it was a debate whether we use adverse impacts or significant impacts, and it was somewhat of a semantic debate. The decision was to leave adverse in there because it leaves the discretion to the commission to find there could be impacts. The house could be impacted by shadow flicker, but it may not be impacted in an adverse way.
Okay. Yes, Chris?
Yeah, just follow up. Similarly on the noise minimum performance standard, it looks like it's a blank check situation for the Cape Cod Commission. In other words, the Cape Cod Commission hires somebody and the applicant pays for it, and as a former applicant representing some clients, I would just always object to something that says somebody else is going to hire somebody and I'm going to pay them without limitation. So just if you could address that, that would be helpful to me.
Yeah, it's not unlike what we do on cell towers, where the applicant pays for, we send out an RFP from the county, we hire consultants that respond to that are available if we have cell towers that come up, and then so that consultant really works for the commission, but is paid for by the applicant. The price is generally within an agreed upon range. But that's one way to make sure that some of these reports from these applicants are objective in nature. And given some of the noise reports that I have had the opportunity to read on several of these projects, I think that that's an important issue, that these are not consultants hired by the applicant, that they're hired by an objective third party. I mean, I think it's worked pretty well in the cell tower case as a precedent.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Paul?
Thank you. I have three questions. One is, I think I've heard at times, and I think may have been from you, Paul, that the writing of these technical bulletins was going to take quite a while, and I'd be curious if you had some guesstimate of how long it would take to actually write them. Number two, which I addressed in a letter to you about a week ago, was whether you, at the Commission, could guarantee that this assembly would at least have the opportunity to review and comment on the technical bulletins and the regulations before they went into effect, even though I understand we don't necessarily have the right to actually change them. And I guess the third is I want to raise the issue with you that has been posed by many of those who have been sending us emails, that the question of who is going to be involved in consulting with the Cape Cod Commission over the technical bulletins, because there has been some indication that that would be weighted towards those who are in the industry. And I guess if that's not going to be the case, or it's going to be a balanced consultation with other people, it would be helpful to know that up front.
Yeah, as it relates to the time frame for the technical bulletins, I mean, I guess that's an open question, but these are not going to necessarily be easy bulletins to put together, and some of it relates to your question 2 and question 3 is what's the process going to be. And I would certainly agree to come back to the Assembly with any draft technical bulletins we had. And I'm also open to perhaps a new process associated with drafting the technical bulletins if people feel that it's going to be, I mean, generally the technical bulletins are developed by staff. But I think we could open that process up too. You know, I mean, I'm open to taking a new approach in this particular matter as it relates to the development of the technical bulletins. But I think you can see, based on the testimony that you've heard, coming to consensus on this is not going to happen. So the question is, at what point, who makes the decision about when you move forward and which standards you're going to use? I think, I think it's crucial. I really do. I think it's crucial to have this discussion, which is why I think it would be appropriate to open up and have more public debate, because I don't think that potential proponents of these projects are well served by not knowing what the expectations are. And I don't think the public is well served by not knowing what standards and what expectations applicants are going to be held to. And I think that really takes what is a highly charged, polarized argument and makes it that much worse. So I recognize the importance and would be open to suggestions on who would have input through the technical bulletin process, and would certainly be open to bringing that draft document back into the Assembly for informational purposes.
Okay, Tom, and then Teresa, and then Tom.
2 years ago, when the regional policy plan was before this Assembly for adoption, there were only 2 groups that were asking for about another 2 months to look at it at that time. And it was the economic development groups, the chambers and others, and the energy section. And had we taken those 2 months, I think you might have built this right into your regional policy plan at that time. Perhaps not, but it might have come up that, gee, you're lacking in needing to be able to deal with wind energy. So I just make that as a comment, that I think when I look back at the logic of this, I'm thinking, why weren't we thinking about this 2 years ago? And to suddenly be put in the position that the delegate from Sandwich feels now, well, it might be because we didn't plan enough. But I'm curious about a statement. For my question really is, you said that we need a certain and predictable reg to stand before the courts.
Yes.
Does this ordinance meet that test?
I believe it does, absolutely.
Without the technical bulletins, there wouldn't be the technical bulletins. It's just this reg that they would need to have before them as the test, and you believe it meets it?
I believe the standards are what have to be on the books for us to review these projects that set up for appeal. Just to comment on some of the comments that were made that were not questions but were comments. If we think back to the regional policy plan, we actually delayed that implementation by 6 months so we could take tons of additional testimony on that issue back then. And part of what you're seeing as it relates to wind is an emerging industry with scale of wind facilities, turbines now that were unimaginable back then. So I think we're trying to evolve with the industry. I think there was also, certainly from the state, some pressure not to regulate wind turbines, to not impede the development of renewable energy. And, which is also a concern of the Commission. So it's a question of balancing that issue. And as it relates to the comments that I've made today, I've made them publicly to the subcommittee before and been consistent with our opinion on that. So,
Teresa?
I just kind of want to tie this back into a timetable. Maybe this is a kind of oversimplistic question, but I think it touches on what both Tom and Tom said. There's a time pressure on this because this will enable areas of review to happen that can't now. There's currently a project in play that this would apply to, so there's kind of a ticking clock out there.
No.
Something real tied to it? That's what I'm confused on.
No, these standards, and this is part of, we started to contemplate these standards when we talk about why we didn't do it then and why we do it now. There are a couple of big reasons why we do it now, whereas originally the state was promoting this, and we wanted to promote renewables. That was fine, but you've got a wind siding reform bill that's likely to pass in January that carves out a specific role for regional planning agencies. Given the fact that we are organized under the Cape Cod Commission Act and we have a regulatory process in place, we can't meet our obligation fully under as spelled out by the legislature without any standards. Additionally, we have the Ocean DCPC out there now where we're trying to determine what the appropriate scale for community wind projects are in state waters. So there'll be another ordinance that comes back in front of this body in June that relates to that. So in both the Ocean Management Act and in the potential for this Wind Siding Reform Act, Cape Cod Commission is given a specific role. Given the way that we do our business, we need standards in place in order to carry that role forward. So those are two specific acts happen subsequent to the regional policy plan that make at least standards, if not a threshold, an imperative for us presently. And that's why we're in front of you today. But they would not apply to the Bourne project because the application for that project was deemed complete. And so it is subject to the regional policy plan that is in place when the application is deemed complete. The standards are not part of the regional policy plan.
So if I understand this right, agreeing to this today would say that the next time something comes along, there would be the height issue, the distance height issue, the no mitigate for adverse noise as a standard and no adverse flicker as a standard to be determined by these future technical bulletins. And it only applies to something that is coming down in the future. There isn't a ticking time thing lurking right there today.
It only applies to projects in the future, and it only applies to projects that Cape Cod Commission review by tripping other thresholds that are not related to the turbines themselves.
Paul, just a technical question. We did a DCPC for the waters. Yep. Just to hold off projects till we have an understanding and everything in place. Can a land-based DCPC be done specific just for wind projects?
Yes.
Is that an avenue that should be explored?
That is open to any number of boards and towns and county entities. And it's a good point, Tom. I mean, if this were subject to a DCPC, then you'd have 12 months to sort of get everything lined up before you had to produce an ordinance. And we have sort of an innovative process associated with the Ocean DCPC now, with the Policy Committee, the Stakeholders Committee, so that could have been another way to go about it. but generally DCPCs are elective actions taken by towns, groups of towns, planning boards, boards of health, all those.
Would it be appropriate for the county commissioners to put forward a DCPC request as an elected board, and could you do one in less than 15 days?
It's within their purview, certainly, to do something like that, and the way the DCPC rules work, as soon as you publish notice, it's effective as a moratorium.
Okay. Paul, you mentioned during one of the public hearings that the state regulations that are anticipated up in Beacon Hill provide a role for regional planning agencies?
Yes.
And including, which would include the Cape Cod Commission?
We are the regional planning agency.
Okay, so I'm going to say is, so we as a county have another layer of I'd say authority, but another layer of input in the siting of wind, or could potentially have another layer of siting and input now.
Yes.
All right, that's one question. The other question I have is, in these minimum performance standards, does it take into account the population that's affected? In other words, you might have, let's say in decibel levels, you might have something that's relatively noisy but only affects a small amount of people, and you might have something that's not quite as noisy, but it may affect a more dense neighborhood at 50 people, or is it simply, is that considered under the benefit, I don't say the benefit, the adverse impact benefit analysis, or is it simply, going out there with a noise meter and checking the decibel levels, and if it affects one person, then that's it?
And Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it does not take into account population consideration, so it doesn't matter if it's 30 people. As long as one person is impacted, then the rules would apply.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm sure we're all going to have a lot more to say about this when the Assembly convenes, but if you mind staying around in case we need further information. I'm sure we have nothing better to do right now, right?
No.
Like the rest of us. Okay. Do we have any communications from public officials? All right. Do we have any communications from members of the public? I see a member of the public who would like to communicate. Yes.
Okay. I never know quite what my role is these days, so it's a pleasure to be referred to as a member of the public. I'm Mary Lou Pettit, and I'm taking you on a whole different direction, and not a contentious one, which is unusual for me probably, but just to put on your hats for just a moment on another area. And I have been planning to be here several other times and couldn't for various reasons, and so Ron has been patient with my presentation, and it has to do with Diane Thompson, the clerk of the Assembly. This is the first time I've been here and not have seen Diane in the corner, and I must say it makes for a very different outlook on who you are. Some of your faces have changed, some have stayed the same, but in the almost 14 years that I served on the Assembly of Delegates, Diane was always there. So it's difficult to really still appreciate the fact that she's not with us. And I want to come before you today just on the matter, very briefly, of some sort of a memorial in her honor, which reflects government standards and good government. And it's a pleasure to do that with a sense of sadness. In 1892, Henry Clay said that government is a trust, and the officers of the government are trustees, and the trust and the trustees are created for the benefit of the people. And I thought of that because there is no one, I think, who was trusted more in government here in Barnstable County than Diane Thompson. We might have all had our differences here, but Diane treated each of us fairly and straightforwardly. And today, when government is so belittled and looked down upon and made fun of, part of everybody's routine at nighttime television, daytime television, I think it's appropriate for us to take a pause and think about examples of good government and examples of people who personified that. And I started to write down some adjectives that described my feelings about Diane, and I think probably reflect a lot of what yours were. To me, she was a teacher. When I first came on board on the Assembly, I did not really know, as most people in the county, what the Assembly was. Diane taught me that. She was an advisor, never stopped being that, regardless of where you came from or how much you knew. She was a manager. She managed the Assembly of Delegates. She managed the legislative branch of government. She was a communicator. Diane never stopped being a communicator with us, with other levels of government, with the public at large. She was fair. She was efficient. Part of anything, if we had efficiency in the Assembly of Delegates, it was because of Diane. She was responsive always to anybody's request, and she never belittled anybody's request. She was knowledgeable. We could think, if we ask Diane, and she knows the rules and the regs, and for the changeover here at the Assembly, it was important there was one person who really knew the regs or would look them up for us. She was trustworthy. She didn't do things behind your back, and that was important in the Assembly of Delegates. She was, to me, the face and the voice for many years of county government. People in the county knew her because this was who you called when you wanted to know what that was on the agenda or what there was a rule. Lawyers knew her, regular citizens knew her, and it wasn't that she wasn't just a voice for the Assembly of Delegates. She was a voice for the entire system of county government. And I think it's very important today to think that we need people more like that. She made it respectful to be a public servant, whether you're hired or elected or appointed. And today that's needed more than it ever has been before, because sometimes people feel that being a public servant is the worst thing you can do, and you are untrustworthy if you do it. And so I thought there ought to be some way we were fortunate that on the Assembly of Delegates we had somebody of her caliber. Not everybody has that in government. And I thought there should be some way that you take time in your schedule, which I realize is busy and contentious with great issues, to think about how you honor somebody in that fashion. And I have just a few options, and that's all they are. They're not coming with any really agenda. They're just saying, these are some of the things you might want to consider. How about a Diane Thompson County Government Staff Fund, which would take some kind of upfront monies, donations from past, present, anybody in government, and set up a fund for benefit of staff at the county level for maybe emergency issues. We did something like that when my husband died suddenly. He was a volunteer at the National Seashore, and we still have a fund, a William Pettit Fund, which they have used to purchase books and resources which they could not have purchased on their own. And that fund has been in existence now almost 20 years. That does take startup monies, but if it's invested properly, it continues to build. Another kind of tribute that would also take monies of some sort might be a scholarship fund in Diane's name at Falmouth High School. She was as treasured in Falmouth as she was here, and there might be, adding to their scholarships, a scholarship for good government, or a scholarship for someone who's interested in going on in government, and that's a possibility. There might be a purchase of books on Barnstable County and county government that go to each of the libraries in her name, with that engraved on the inside, to all the libraries on the Cape and the high school libraries. That would be less of a fund cost. A special painting, perhaps, of some sort, once we find out her particular interest in art, with a plaque under it displayed prominently in memory of Diane. Maybe some kind of a tree or a planting. I mean, there are untold examples, a series of programs on county government called the Diane Thompson Good Government Series, a written tribute that is circulated. Nothing about Diane ever appeared in the Cape Cod Times, and I know I've seen other articles about her from the other end of the Cape that were superbly done, but someone who spent so much time with us and gave so much of herself deserved more than that in public recognition. And as well as a tribute, it could be not just a tribute to Diane, but a plus for the county. We never do things like this in the county. I don't think we're thought of as a caring, compassionate group of people. And the staff that works here and the staff that has worked with us are true treasures. And I think it's time that we acknowledge that and appreciated it. And I think it could give great credit to the county to do something. So it would also be a plus for the county to have people pay more attention that this is done in Barnstable County in the name of good government and honoring Diane. One other example, I thought, how about a Barnstable County Government Citizen of the Year Award, which is done by both branches of county government, and we certainly deserve to give the county government more attention, and call it the Diane Thompson Award. These are just several examples, and I'm sure that others of you have others to think about. But my thought about that is the way that that could be implemented, if you are so inclined, would be the appointment of an ad hoc committee, a small committee, which could consist of an assembly of delegate member, a staff representative, a county executive perhaps, somebody from the Falmouth government or Falmouth Housing Authority, and with input from Diane's family, could come up with something to come back to you with. And perhaps it would also need to be approved, I don't know, by the commissioners. It would be helpful if we were united in this. But I just wanted to take that kind of time with you today because I think it's important that we recognize and honor people like Diane Thompson, not forget them, and not forget the years of great, good, effective, efficient, and caring service she gave us. And I think that would reflect well on you, but it would also be a tribute to her. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mary Lou. We'll take those suggestions under consideration, and perhaps we'll come up with something that we would recommend. Now, I'm also going to ask for communications from members of the public, but we're going to have the theme from Jeopardy is going to be ticking in the background, and when the buzzer goes off, that's going to be it. So I'll recognize someone here. Are you for or against these regulations?
Very much against.
Okay, step up to the.
I'd like to, I'm Bruce McPherson from Hyannisport.
Yes, could you spell
MC, capital P-H-E-R-S-O-N.
Thank you.
Bruce. I've taken the courses at community college on wind development, so I'm speaking from just that background and no more. I think the most important things we've heard tonight was from Mr. Nedwicky, and that is that we've got to make some general regulations that work, some standards. I've worked at a prep school, and when I was there, we heard about a guy named Headmaster Perry who'd worked at Andover years ago, Exeter, whichever. He, when he took over, said, there are no laws in this school, basically, but as long as you act as gentlemen, I guess he said, as long as you act as gentlemen, there are no laws. So can we somehow or another incorporate that as a basis of one of the regulations that Mr. Nedwicky is talking about? How else do we address this wonderful problem that's coming up in Falmouth, where sooner or later, certain of those residents are going to have to abort their houses and just leave them and walk away from $500,000 or whatever? Do we make, as one of the regulations, some specification that the person who puts up a project has, if doctors and lawyers say that a person is being driven out of their home as citizens of the United States under the Constitution, do we have to legislate that the person who put up the turbines has to compensate those victims, so to speak? Is that one of the bases that we could, anyway, let me quickly now divert, having said that, to give you some idea of the problem that this distance generates, 600 feet. We heard the other day that a Vestas, whatever size turbine, in its instruction manual asked that the people keep 1,300 feet clear. So what they're saying basically is that there's the prospect of a turbine throwing a blade. Now, at Bourne last night, we were talking about 2.5 megawatt turbines. And I don't know what that particular blade is. That was a 2.5. Let me go to a Siemens 2.3 turbine. A blade weighs roughly 22,000 pounds. And it's going to be half of 93 and half of 100 meters long. So it's going to be 50 meters times 3. It's going to be 150 feet long, maybe, and weigh 22,000 pounds. And what the company is telling you, that there is a chance that that machine can throw a blade that weighs 4 times what my car does, 1,300 feet. So this is the kind of regulation we've got to. Now, you can boil that down, interestingly enough, to, as somebody testified the other day, 3.2 times the top of the blade height to the ground. Or you can take, so I think this is the kind of regulations that you should be looking for as you try and figure out how we're going to make these rules.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take another comment, because Mr. Nzwicki obviously was here in support of the ordinance that he has passed. I'll take another comment in favor, or against the regulations. Just.
Could you follow Mr. Senni, who had spoken before and sent out a letter?
I was going to recognize him. I just wanted to make sure I had a balance here, but I'll recognize Mr. Senni at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. My name is Christopher Senni. I live in Westboro, Massachusetts, which is not close to the Cape, although I have some connection with the Cape. My father-in-law lives in Dennis, and for 25 years, no matter where we've lived, my wife and I have come to Dennis every summer, so it's a special part of my life as well as yours. I represent 18 residents near the Falmouth turbine and 27 residents who live in close proximity to the planned turbines in Bourne. And I'm not going to talk about the merits of turbine applications. I'm going to talk specifically about the minimum standards that you're considering tonight. I'd like to put it in a little bit of perspective. First, not every big turbine would come before you. And this set of standards doesn't change that. Only if a turbine project happened to trigger DRI review, I mean, when I say you, I meant the Commission, by disturbing enough area on the ground or being associated with a large enough building, would any of these standards apply. Now, that's unlike cell towers or other communications towers. Your regulations say that any cell tower that's 35 feet tall, if it's a lattice type, or 80 feet tall if it's a different type, would trigger a DRI. And these machines are very large, and the technology is changing and moving into more densely populated areas. I think one of the things that would be great is if the minimum standards would recognize that we really want to trigger that jurisdiction with any of these very large turbines. As you know, there are 5 that were recently proposed in Plymouth, which is not one of the Cape Towns, 8 in Wareham, and 7 in Bourne. All of them are 492 feet tall. So one of the recommendations I would make, if you do send this back, is to say to the commission staff, draft us a regulation that will actually change the trigger so that what comes before the commission is any one of these very large turbines. Second of all, your job is to approve modifications to the regional planning policy, and the document where it starts to move off into these new minimum standards talks in terms of the following minimum performance standards shall apply. Now, in terms of noise, this really isn't a standard. It's a comment that if your turbine is more than 1 megawatt in output, you should have a study done. But if you want what the executive director and I both want, which is certainty in these standards, I don't think what you have before you is certain enough. And he's right that when the United States government passes a law and creates a new agency, that agency might have the power to adopt its own regulations. But we're at that level here. You are charged with approving modifications to this regional policy plan that would be the standards. You do have a standard on safety. It's 1.5 times the height of the tower. That's a standard. And you could leave the rest to that technical bulletin. With shadow flicker, while it's a 0 standard, it's a standard. But with noise, there's really no meat to it. There's nothing that you can say is provided in this standard. You have to just look at the technical bulletin. And I don't think it's good. It's best practices as far as how you should approve a modification of the regional policy plan. You are supposed to be looking at standards. It doesn't have to be much. In fact, I circulated a draft just to show that in a couple of small paragraphs, you can actually have standards. You can do it either by setback, you can do it by noise threshold, you could do it by a maximum height. You might feel that the mass maritime sized turbines are more appropriate for the Cape area towns given the population density here, or something in between 492 feet and those turbines. The turbines that I mentioned, that I'm involved in, representing neighborhood groups on, are 4.5 times the size of Mass Maritime Academy. You might not want to go that high. You might want to have a standard that says, well, unless you're at Otis Air Force Base, these things should be a little bit smaller. There are many sizes of electrical turbines that generate good electricity and help us improve the environment that don't have to be this big. In fact, the ones on the drawing boards now are the largest turbines that would be built on the East Coast, so these are very large. Finally, I definitely agree with the executive director that what we need here is leadership. These are large machines. They're elevated fans. They do create an amplitude modulated noise that is a concern, not just in Falmouth, but in many other communities. I was thrilled to see in the memo that he circulated the sentence, the Cape Cod Commission's minimum performance standards for noise would require applicants to conduct a noise study that measures both nighttime and daytime ambient noise levels and would consider the impacts of amplitude modulation and low-frequency sound emitted by turbines. That warms my heart. The only thing I'm concerned about is amplitude modulation. These blades make a very stubborn sound once a second. It's stubborn, it travels far, it tends to be on the lower frequencies, and it causes distress in neighborhoods. But that's not written into the standard. It could be, but it's not. And we don't know if it will be in the technical bulletin. So we really don't know what it is we're approving tonight. I think you 15 members of this assembly should take the bull by the horns and create a policy, a new minimum standard for Cape Cod. What kind, what size wind turbines should we have here? We have to do our part with geothermal, with solar, with wind power. But you should decide. This is where we need the leadership. And if you're not satisfied that the draft minimum standards before you is the exercise of strong leadership on a very difficult issue, send it back. It's going to take months to develop the technical bulletin anyway, and we don't know what that's going to say. I would send it back and say, Commission, please create a threshold so that any tower over 100 feet or any turbine over 100 feet triggers a DRI, and then give us some standards. Let us look at distance, let us look at sound levels, let's have a real standard. In terms of what kind of microphone is used or where it's placed when you measure or how quickly you measure or for what duration, that can all be in the technical bulletin. But before you send things over to the technical bulletin, these minimum standards, which is really what you're doing, ought to have some standards included. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to